Hi, everybody. I hope you can see me here. Just hoping that we can get Dr. DiCarlo to join us as well here on his, that's great. Perfect. I think we're ready to go here. All right. Okay. Thanks everybody for joining us. I'm really excited today. This is going to be the first of what will be a monthly series, in fact, that we're doing called Ethics During COVID-19. And what we're going to do is explore all the issues that have come about because of the global pandemic and some of the difficult ethical questions that we as a society have had to face. So we're lucky enough to be joined today by Dr. Christopher DiCarlo. Dr. DiCarlo is a philosopher, an educator, and an author, and he often teaches at the Faculty of Philosophy at the University of Toronto in Scarborough and the Life Institute at Ryerson University in Toronto. Dr. DiCarlo is the principal and founder of Critical Thinking Solutions, a consulting business for individuals, corporations, and not-for-profits in both the public and private sectors. He is also the developer of the first pilot project in Canada to introduce universal critical thinking skills into the Ontario Public High School curriculum, which started in the Upper Grand District School Board. But most importantly, Dr. DiCarlo is the ethics chair for the Canadian Mental Health Association in Waterloo, Wellington. And we have really benefited from the guidance and help and facilitation of Dr. DiCarlo over the years. Welcome, Dr. DiCarlo.
Thank you very much.
So before we get started, I'll just let our viewers know that you may be joining us either on the Zoom webinar link or via our Facebook Live broadcast. We are ready to receive questions on either platform, so feel free to type your questions into the Q&A section of either Zoom or Facebook, and we will do our best to answer those questions. So if we can't get to your questions live, we will endeavor to answer all of your questions at our next webinar, and we will be doing this webinar series every month. Our next one is in May, and we'll send out that link in an email to you after this webinar. And also just to let you know that this recording of this webinar will also be posted on the CMHA Waterloo Wellington webpage and on our YouTube channel after this webinar is over. So without further ado, Dr. DiCarlo, let me hand the baton over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen here. Good. Right, so we're going to talk about conspiracies, COVID, and mental health today. Little background information. So I'm currently writing this book with a client of mine called Pixel Dreams in Toronto. The CEO is very ambitious, very interesting guy. And he asked me to write a series of essays and about conspiracy theories, and they're turning it into a book. They're involved in branding and marketing and whatnot, but they're also a think tank, and I've been asked to head up that arm of his particular business in order to raise intelligence and consciousness. So that's basically the research that I've been doing is for this particular client. Now, in order to find out what goes into the making of a conspiracy theorist, we must consider a few things, right? Causal influences that contribute to their particular states of mind. And this allows us to be, better enabled in understanding both the physical and the cultural constraints which bias their particular points of view. So, what are biases and how do they contribute to the making of a conspiracy theorist? So we know that biases influence or constrain people in different ways, and the way in which they understand and act upon various types of information. Now, how we all eventually come to acquire and revise and retain opinions or beliefs about various issues is the result of a long process of development influenced by these kind of internal and external biases. Now, even prior to our birth, there were causal factors which influence and bias how we understand the world. So it's very important to understand these influences so we can better understand how and why conspiracists believe the things they do. Now, there are many types of biases, as you know, but they all generally fall under two categories, biological and cultural. Let's take a quick look at some of the biological biases. We might say, for example, did my genes make me do it? We know every living species on this planet, from amoeba to zebra, possess genetic instructions we call deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. And this informs how our cells function, as well as, those species will behave under certain types of conditions. Now, the behavior of all species on this planet, including ourselves, is based in many ways by the history and evolution of DNA. This, however, does not mean that humans cannot act otherwise. We're not dancing bees, as it were, or army ants marching to a particular DNA coding. We are conscious beings, and as such, we seemingly possess the capacity to control or alter our behavior. But how much control do we really have in this regard? Consider two examples. Janice is a 20-year-old woman from Chicago, Illinois, who's watched several people in her family suffer and die from Huntington's disease. Based on her genetic lineage, she faces a 50-50 chance of possessing the Huntington's disease gene. There's an equal chance she will either develop symptoms of the disease or she will not. Second example, Bob is a 57-year-old man from Lincoln, Nebraska, who has inherited genes largely responsible for NPD, or narcissistic personality disorder. Such a disorder is a mental condition in which people have an inflated sense of their own importance, a deep need for excessive attention and admiration, troubled relationships, and a lack of empathy for others. But behind the mask of extreme confidence lies a fragile self-esteem that's vulnerable to the slightest criticism. Recent evidence indicates that such a disorder is often found in people who tend to believe in conspiracy theories. In the first example, the expression or non-expression of genes is either going to cause Janice to develop Huntington's disease, or it is not. The odds are exactly 50-50. In the second example, gene expression may cause Bob to believe in conspiracy theories, or it may not. For not all narcissists are conspiracists, but surprisingly, what we found is that a large percentage of conspiracists are narcissists. The second biological bias we can consider, might ask, did my brain make me do it? We know our brains are responsible for how we understand the world. If you or someone you know has suffered from mental illness, you'll understand the ways in which they are biased to see the world differently, simply because there might be a chemical imbalance within their brains. So it follows that those who are afflicted with specific forms of mental illnesses are biased in ways that cause them to understand information differently. Now, our research has found the following mental commonalities amongst conspiracy theorists. So in looking at the psychological profile, what we found is, aside from things like narcissism, there are other types of genetic factors which contribute to neurotic or paranoid tendencies, such as schizotypal personality disorder. Now, this disorder typically includes 5 or more of these signs and symptoms that a person might exhibit. Being a loner, having flat emotions, or limited or inappropriate emotional responses, persistent and excessive social anxiety, incorrect interpretation of events, such as a feeling that something that is actually harmless or inoffensive has a direct personal meaning, peculiar, eccentric, or unusual thinking, beliefs, or mannerisms, suspicious or paranoid thoughts and constant doubts about the loyalty of others, belief in special powers such as mental telepathy or superstitions, unusual perceptions, sensing an absent person's presence or having illusions, dressing in peculiar ways such as appearing unkempt or wearing oddly matched clothes, and a peculiar style of speech such as vague or unusual patterns of speaking or rambling oddly during conversations. Now, social psychologists attempt to identify specific, what we call predictors of belief that give rise to conspiracy theories in an attempt to understand and potentially manage such beliefs. Now, some of these predictors of belief include, but they're not limited to, things like odd beliefs, magical thinkings, a subtype of schizotypy, Machiavellianism, being very much in control. There's grandiose narcissism, vulnerable narcissism, primary psychopathy, secondary psychopathy. And these are predictive of people who tend to have beliefs in conspiracy theories. One of the most harmful, and on the most harmful end of the spectrum of those who believe in conspiracy theories are those who are very strategic. They're very manipulative, and they're dominant, and they're often callous. Some people tend to come to mind when we think of this type of characteristic. And whether you're a Trump supporter or not, if you were ever angered by what Mr. Trump did, how he behaved or whatnot, does it make it easier for you to understand that in all likelihood, he was a grandiose, malignant narcissist, perhaps even a sociopath? And so when he acts in specific ways, he's actually being consistent to the biases from which he is operating according to, both his physical and, as we'll see, cultural biases. So in order to try to explain other aspects of what's going on in the world of a conspiracist, we have to look at other behaviors. And it's a title I refer to as "We're All on Drugs, Sex, Survival, and Status." Now, we need to keep in mind that we have been emotional beings a lot longer than we've been so-called rational beings. Our brains have evolved over millions of years in ways that influence our behavior to achieve specific goals. Now, in biology, the two largest and most central goals of all living things are, in no particular order, sex and survival. Attaining both of these goals, surviving and reproducing, does not simply have to have a practical benefit, but it's incentivized with a greater neurological payload in the form of specific neural transmissions. In other words, during certain types of activities, right, we get high, essentially. In this way, all humans, and for that matter, all mammals, are constantly, as they say, on drugs. If you can remember from your childhood days, enjoying the thrill, say, of an amusement ride, or going to the beach, or being cradled in your mother's arms, or being pushed on a swing in the playground, that joyful, warm, and an exuberant thrill you were experiencing was the direct result of specific neurotransmitters like, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, vasopressin, and so on, that were coursing through your brain and essentially making you high. Our brains have evolved to get us to behave in specific ways that increases our likelihood to survive and reproduce. So this is why eating good food tastes so great, and why sexual activity feels so incredible. Evolution has modeled our brains with great neural payloads, so we will behave in particular ways. Taking substances like alcohol, cannabis, hallucinogens, and so on. These are really evolutionary shortcuts. In other words, they produce neural payloads without us actually having to do anything. But in all biological ecosystems, every species, including us, including humans, seeks to attain and maintain a kind of a relative comfort level known as biological equilibrium. This is sometimes referred to as homeostasis. All forms of life are driven to regulate their internal environments in relation to changing external environmental factors, and thereby process energy and ultimately survive. So we need to act in ways that are going to increase the likelihood that we're going to survive until the next day. So we need to find food and shelter and security and so on, but we're also driven to reproduce. And so much of our time is preoccupied in the determination of finding a mate, or at least having sex. Whatever Cultures have evolved throughout history. They are the direct result of our genetically hardwired programs to survive and reproduce. And in this way, biology always holds culture on a very short leash. We are often the victims of our biological constraints or biases. So as such, we seek out information and activities which increases our likelihood to attain these two biological goals, survival and reproduction. History has well demonstrated that those who can attain the greatest status, gain resources, and influence within a specific group will increase their likelihood to attain these two goals. It should come as no surprise then that emotionally, conspiracists see themselves as possessing privileged information, which in turn increases their status and at the same time gets them high. This is what I refer to as mimetic equilibrium. In other words, any cultural artifacts from your hairstyle or your clothes to the music you prefer, to your concepts of politics or religion or sex or whatever, are essentially memes. So memes are just cultural artifacts. These books that you see, the clothes, electricity, or our thoughts about the existence or non-existence of God. We decided that memes is a good term to cover all cultural artifacts. So just as we establish biological equilibrium, so too within culture do we have lots of cultural artifacts, and we develop a mimetic equilibrium. And so in attempting to get someone to give up the high of being right with their conspiratorial views, this is not going to be easy. Conspiracists, much like deeply religious individuals, often find themselves quite comfortable with their view of the world at that given point in time. Their beliefs represent to them the most important information possibly attainable. No other information is as important, and no other information gets them as high as what they believe to be true. So it's extremely important to remember that when talking to a conspiracist, it is not unlike talking to either a deeply religious individual or an alcoholic or a drug addict. If you try to introduce information that contradicts their current worldview and cherished beliefs, it's like trying to falsify the existence of God to a deeply religious person, or like taking the bottle from the hands of an alcoholic or the needle from the arm of a junkie. They will see you as the problem, as that which stands between them and their joyful highs. You, in that case, are the buzzkill, and hence you will be perceived as the problem. Now, the neurological and biological drives of the human condition, combined with the complexities of ideas generated with cultures around the world, creates the desire for many individuals to seek out information and resources that will increase their status and maintain this kind of biological and mimetic equilibria. But there's an interesting battle going on within each one of our brains between our emotional center, right, our limbic system, which causes our emotional reactions, and our prefrontal cortex, or that which is our rational center, which allows us to step back from our emotions, that which allows us to be more critically reflective of why and how it is we think and behave. This is, generally speaking, what the Big Bang's Amy Farrah Fowler referred to as the thrilla adjacent to the amygdala. That's a very good joke. I hope some of you are at least laughing. There's an aside to this. In order to get this joke actually requires some knowledge of brain neurology and a history of boxing is what you need. And at the break, if you have a question about that, we can discuss it. We have a strong emotional need to be liked, to be listened to be respected, and to be cared for. These emotions have been with our species for millions of years, and they're very strong predictors of belief, whether we're conspiracists or not. And emotions often get in the way. and they overrule our critical thinking capacities. So we must know what we're in for when talking to a conspiracy theorist, for much of their current identity is intimately and emotionally tied to their current less conventional beliefs. If we can understand how such biases might influence a conspiracist, then we will be in a far better position in which to dialogue or in which to talk to and hopefully help them. Considering how our biases influence our thoughts and our actions is one of the clearest ways to help us better understand why we have disagreements, so that we might engage the conspiracist in healthy and helpful dialogue. Unfortunately, sometimes the field itself is part of the problem. And by this, what I mean is that our research indicates that conspiracy theories, they tend to come and go in waves. The peaks of the waves tend to correlate very highly with major societal upheavals, wars, natural disasters, and that sort of thing. So it's not surprising that during the time of COVID, during a world pandemic, you're seeing an upswing and an uptick in the number of conspiracy theories that are circulating. Now, within societies, fear and ignorance among the masses is not really a kind of a good place to be. When catastrophic events do occur, it becomes a natural defense mechanism to seek out and to try to explain and to fill in the gaps, as it were, of one's world. You know, why is COVID happening? Is it because of animals in China that passed on viruses? No. Is it 5G towers? No. Is it Bill Gates putting microchips into my body so he can track my every move? Right? Where people are trying to explain things. I refer to these as epistemic lacunae, or gaps in your explanation that you don't have quick and ready answers for. So you fill in those gaps with whatever happens to make sense at a particular point in time. The perceived cognitive dissonance, combined with this desire to maintain a mimetic equilibrium, also combined with the pre-existing biological biases I mentioned before, can easily lead to someone becoming involved in believing various conspiracies. Now, let's look at some cultural biases, family upbringing. For example, imagine your childhood from your earliest memories to now. How were you raised? What type of family did you grow up in? You know, how you were raised has an enormous influence on what we believe and how we behave. And we found that this is particularly evident when it comes to things like bullying. Our research has uncovered that one reason a child might bully is because they have an insecurity, and they compensate basically with kind of an egocentrism and a narcissistic attitude. So they act to counteract feeling small, essentially. So protecting a fragile self-esteem with a heightened and rigid defense structure basically leads to a kind of a deflection or projection, often narcissism again, and a victim type of mentality is frequently the result. The bully is often able to deflect accountability while projecting blame at the same time. So this might explain why the character trait of narcissism is found so often in conspiracists. Being unique and believing information that the status quo does not simultaneously draws status attention to the conspirators, while at the same time seeks to make others accountable for certain behavior. So there's a very interesting psychosocial dynamic that's going on. If we look at ethnicity, to what extent is racism or xenophobia indoctrinated within specific ethnic circles? You know, why do Arabs and Jews and Turks and Greeks and Indians and Pakistanis and many other ethnic groups continue to dislike one another to the point of terrorism, war, or even in some cases genocide? War and conflict creates a social psychological phenomenon in which we objectify and vilify the enemy as subhuman. The enemy, or the other, is dehumanized and often compared to various forms of vermin or pestilence. For example, in World War II, Jews were equated with rats that move in and take over areas while spreading contagion. Mexicans are likened to cockroaches who invade the US and spread disease, and so on. When you dehumanize others, it makes it easier and more justifiable to hate and harm them, because they are not like us, right? They are subhuman. They're like animals. And since we commonly kill so-called vermin with little regard, so too are we justified in killing our enemies, who are literally no different. And of course, this speaks to the notion of in-group, out-group identification. We demarcate lines. I'm a socialist, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm a liberal, whatever. We have these lines. And then we know who belongs within our group and who does not belong within our group. So ethnicities which have been at war for generations often remember and foster hatred for their enemies for centuries. It should come as little surprise then that such indoctrination could influence and bias the minds of its community with stories and half-truths and conspiracy theories about the so-called other. If we were to look at religion, we do not need to delve too far into history to witness the atrocities brought about by specific world religions fueled by conspiratorial thinking. Now, to be sure, many world religions have accomplished great things, from great works of art to the compassion for the sick, the downtrodden, and the dying. If religious beliefs are not harming other humans or other species, it's really none of my or anyone's business. However, when any ideology, religious or secular, generates harm, we have the right, and some might say duty, to speak and act out. Just one example to demonstrate this particular point is the Jewish blood libel. Towards the end of the Dark Ages in Western Europe, an idea began circulating that on an annual basis, Jewish cabals would choose a child from a village to be sacrificed around the time of Easter or Passover in order to mock the Passion of the Christ. The child's blood would apparently be harvested for use in rituals. Now, in 1173, the monk Thomas of Monmouth, he stated, "It was written that the Jews, without the shedding of human blood, could neither obtain their freedom, nor could they ever return to their fatherland. Hence it was laid down by them in ancient times that every year they must sacrifice a Christian in some part of the world to the Most High God in scorn and contempt of Christ, that so they might avenge their sufferings on him." As fear of these types of atrocities circulated, so too did anti-Semitism evolve and morph throughout Western Europe. Let's fast forward some 900 years, and we again witness massive beliefs in a satanic cabal, feasting on the blood of innocent children. Believe it or not, this is happening in real time today, and this latest blood libel is known as QAnon. We can talk about this group perhaps at the break. Geographic location, the very fact that you live in a particular part of the world, will have a profound influence on how you interpret and act on information. How someone in the UK will understand the Syrian conflict will be different from those who live within Middle Eastern countries. But geographic location can be even more specific than this. For example, consider the identities and differences between provinces in Canada, states in the United States, regions of England. Just consider just soccer teams and the loyalties people have within regions of various parts of the world, right? Rivalries often develop between neighboring cities. One can just think of the fictional rivalry between Springfield and Shelbyville in the cartoon series The Simpsons. If we look at education, we know that levels of education favor fairly heavily in susceptibility to believing in conspiracy theories. Some prominent research papers speak to the inverse relationship between increased education and decreased belief in such theories. Papers, Analytic Thinking Reduces Belief in conspiracy theories, why education predicts decreased belief in conspiracy theories, changing conspiracy beliefs through rationality, and ridiculing, teach the conspiracies for what they are. Now, we have to be careful here because there are plenty of highly educated people who maintain belief in at least some aspects of various conspiracy theories, for example, anti-vaxxers or 9/11 deniers. When we talk about education, perhaps we should more specifically be referring maybe to critical thinking, kind of a subset of education. When we look to the media, we are constantly inundated with information coming from various forms, the internet, television, movies, newspapers, magazines, art, and so on. Over the last 2 decades, there's been an increasing rise in what we've seen as fake news, especially online. This involves information that can appear on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or any other such sites in which people have deliberately created fake or false information to appear as though it is reliable. Now, we must be on our guard against these types of fake accounts because in doing so, we become much more media literate. We have to empower ourselves with critical thinking skills that will allow us to recognize when information is not factual. So we cannot simply believe everything we see or read just because it's on the internet or in a magazine or on television. We need to ask, very good. Yes, we need to, we need to ask ourselves where we get our information. So, do you get your information mostly from online sources? Television, newspapers, we hardly see newspapers anymore, magazines, the schoolyard, your neighbor. We need to be aware that all information, no matter what type. Oh, I'm just looking at the poll results. Oh, very good. Oh, interesting. Good. So we have to understand that there's really no such thing as unbiased information, that no matter who we are, no matter where we are in the world, how we get our information is going to have a certain level of bias, including what I'm telling you today. It's impossible to avoid any kind of bias in the information that we receive. So if we can keep in mind the idea that all of the information we view will be coming to us through a certain biased process, and that we ourselves are biased in looking at that information, this can go a long way in helping us understand the relationship to which all of us stand in relation to this type of information. Everything you think and everything you do is the result of your biological and cultural biases. So we need to do this bias check and become aware that any new information presented to us must pass through kind of a series of filters before we either accept it or reject it or remain indifferent to it. Now, what else is happening with conspiracy theories is that there's this diametric process at work. The field itself might be the problem. Here's the field itself. There's been a gradual decline of news journalism, certainly over the last 20 to 30 years, simultaneously with the sudden rise of social media. And it's difficult to pinpoint exactly when journalism began to lose its integrity. Now, mind you, I'm not saying journalists do not have integrity today. They do, but they're handcuffed by the way in which the whole process of information distribution has evolved. So on a personal note, my earliest reflection of when journalism started to erode somewhat was from a sitcom. Some of you will remember the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Here you have Mary Tyler Moore and her boss, Luke Grant. and Ted Baxter as the anchorman, and Murray Slaughter, and there's Betty White and whatnot. It was a great series, and I have a clip to play, which to me was the earliest point in American history where we started to realize the decline of integral journalism. Now, to play this, I have to stop share, and then I have to go back in and reshare. So I will do that.
Go ahead. Well,
Okay, so let me there. So here's an episode in which Lou Grant, his character, and Mary Tyler Moore and Ted Baxter have gone up to see Jack Stoneham, the new manager of the television studio, to discuss what the news content should actually have, and the rest should be fairly self-explanatory.
Go ahead.
Well, I just don't think that there's anything wrong with trying to make the news more in an entertaining way.
Exactly.
We're talking about news here. News. Our job isn't to make people laugh. It's to let them know what's happening. I can live with ratings. When I was an editor, I used to live with circulation numbers. But when the circulation went down, we didn't put the comics on the front page. News is truth, Jack. And I'm not going to make it into something fake.
Why not?
Why not?
Well, after all, Lou, there's fake and then there's fake.
So that is the earliest reference I could recall of the term fake news being used on American television. That was 1972. Some of you might remember the movie Network that came out in 1975. It was a bit of a satire as to the be-all and end-all of ratings, you know. Throughout the 70s, the news changed. They went from single anchor reporters to dual anchors who provide like witty banter and commentary about the stories they're covering. This shift in reporting the news to commenting on the news was a crucial development in journalistic history. And it was coming largely from the United States. This fostered continuous competition amongst news services on television to spruce up, right? Or make the reporting of news more entertaining to the general public. Form became more important than substance. And eventually, the entertainment aspect of appealing to viewers to increase ratings began to overshadow the journalistic integrity of those doing the reporting. News is truth, Jack. That will be the title of one of our chapters in the book, for sure. We must never, never forget that. Otherwise, what is the news? Just commentary? Just editorializing? I don't need to hear that. I can figure out what to think. Just report the facts. That's what the news should be. We've gotten quite far away from that. Now, in the 1980s, there was a new model of television news reporting that was taking hold, but something else was going on as well. You know, the 80s ushered in MTV, VHS videos, big hair, pay TV, and 24-hour news stations. In Atlanta, Ted Turner had started CNN, and around-the-clock news casting had begun. In the decades to follow, major news outlets would be established or purchased by wealthy billionaires with very clear political leanings. Today, about 15 billionaires and 6 corporations own most of the US news outlets. The biggest media conglomerates in America: AT&T, Comcast, Walt Disney, National Amusements, Viacom, CBS, News Corp, Fox, Sony, and Hearst Communications. It should come as little surprise to witness the way such forms of media bias and influence the manner in which news has been presented and how viewers can be affected by that. Now, while news was being decayed over time by being spruced up, social media was on the rise. By the end of the 20th century, 4% of the world's population was online. Today, 65+ percent are online. Aside from the development of human languages and movable type in a printing press, the internet has provided information to more people throughout the world than any other medium in the history of our existence. Think about that. In the last several decades, it's become possible for practically anyone, anywhere in the world to connect to people and information sources, which immediately provides results. This phenomenon has created what have been called news deserts, places throughout the world where there are now only 1 or 2 local newspapers. This makes it much easier for people in positions of power to commit crimes without actually being caught. It also means that anything that looks like the news can pass for the news. And that's dangerous because it gives people with little to no authority or experience the capacity to say essentially whatever they want. Filling the void of journalistic wasteland with privately run and deeply opinionated websites is a dangerous path to misinformation and, even worse, disinformation. The rise of such online sites has contributed significantly to the barrage of misinformation and conspiracy theories now flourishing around the world. When we consider online information, we cannot ignore what I call omniscient algorithms. As the integrity of journalistic reporting was waning and social media was rising in the last 2 decades, this incredible phenomenon was occurring which aided the process of conspiracies, computerized algorithms, right? But what do we mean by that? Right? In essence, algorithms are essentially instructions that are followed by a computer step by step to do something potentially useful or to solve a problem. You might consider a cake recipe as a type of algorithm for making a cake. In computing, algorithms provide computers with a successive guide to completing successive actions. They're comprised of a precise list of instructions that outline exactly how to complete a task. So what is an algorithm? A good way to think of them is like a mini set of instructions, like a little manual telling computers how to complete a given task or manipulate given data. You might have first experienced the effects of algorithms if you've ever ordered anything online, like an Amazon purchase. Let's say you purchased a toothbrush online, and eventually you'll notice ads appearing on some of your browser pages suggesting various products like toothpaste or dental floss or other products related to dental hygiene. You can thank algorithms for that. It's picked up that you have a like for something, and so it then suggests or nudges you algorithmically to consider other similar types of products. The power of machine learning that has enabled these algorithms to nudge you in these specific directions according to your profile's interests, they reveal a lot. Data is very valuable to online consumerism. Public commentator Tristan Harris says, even 2 friends who are so close to each other, who almost have the exact same set of friends, they think, I'm going to go to a news feed on Facebook and I'll see the exact same set of updates. But it's not like that at all. They see completely different worlds because they're based on the computers calculating what's perfect for each one of them. So we all think we're commonly looking at the same screens. We're not, based on what our preferences are. We're actually being fed certain types of information without without realizing that that's how these algorithms function behind the scene. So this is how the process of the internet further influences the proliferation of misleading information online. These self-learning algorithms create the perfect environment for conspiracy theorists to meet and further network with like-minded individuals. It's not by coincidence, by the way, that if you've seen footage of anti-mask rallies happening during COVID, you'll also see anti-vaxxers, you'll see flat earthers, you'll see more than a few religious groups who believe in God's love over supposed science. And the reason why is because if you belong to one conspiracy group, you're a flat earther, you're eventually, these algorithms are going to suggest, hey, you know, there's a rally for certain things coming up, and then you can follow that. And this is known as going down the rabbit hole of being sucked in to more and more misinformation. So this has led us to believe that our digital lives online are roughly the same as everyone else's, but that's not the case at all. So then we might ask ourselves, wow, okay, what are we going to do about this? The first question we should consider are we really that digitally manipulated to this extent? The answer is yes, we are being manipulated, but there are independent, reliable news sources to which we can turn to find out actual facts regarding important issues. And as bleak as the picture that I presented seems to be, we can forearm ourselves with some of the most reliable sources of information available online. And this is just a short list, but Snopes and PolitiFact and FactCheck.org and NPR Fact Check. There's a lot of these sources that we can go to where they'll be less biased. And what I mean by that is that's about as good as we're going to get. It's sort of like probability. You're never going to get certainty, but at least you're going to get, you know, less biased information. And that, I think, is an important, these are important resources to be able to use. Now, it might be argued that, you know, algorithms can push us in various directions, but it is possible to attain more reliable information from these types of sources. So in our research, what we've discovered is that there's this inverse proportional relationship going on here over the last 20 to 30 years, where the decline of journalism combined with the rise of social media has led to a perfect storm in which misinformation and disinformation can spread very, very quickly. You know, Mark Twain said, a lie can make itself halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. And we liken it to the unringing of a bell. Once false information gets out there, it's like unringing a bell, stopping it, because people get onto it, they share it blindly, they don't look into it, they don't cross-reference, they simply keep pushing false information, and it can often lead to kind of, in some cases, mass hysteria. These two processes diametrically have increased the ease with which this disinformation gets shared online. And we've also seen that the very nature of the operating procedures of online activity skews very heavily in favor of confirming our already pre-existing biases. But as they say, to be forewarned is to be forearmed. In other words, now that we know the processes which have led to our current state of digital evolution, we can take measures to assure that we avoid succumbing to the trappings of these types of online algorithms. And so what I can do now is, you know, I'm sure many of you have thought about conspiracy theories. Some of you might subscribe, even unconsciously, to some conspiracy theories. And I'm wondering if you were to pick the top 3 conspiracy theories of all time, you know, if you were to tally a list, and I'm being a little bit facetious here, but nonetheless, my colleagues and I have gone through much of the literature, and in terms of conspiracy theories that that have existed over time, these seem to be amongst the most popular. Are they the top? No, of course not. But nonetheless, some of these will have resonance with you. Obviously, the most current one is that Donald Trump maintains the big lie, the idea that the election was stolen from him and that the Democrats somehow rigged the election. How did Jeffrey Epstein die? Why did he die the way he did? The Sandy Hook massacre, some people like Alex Jones, you might remember, said some of those people, the kids who died, were actually actors, which is an absolutely horrific thing for a human to say. Some of you who are a little bit older, Beatles fans, will remember back in the day, it was believed that Paul McCartney was dead because he wasn't wearing shoes, I believe, on the cover of the Abbey Road album. Planet X, people believe that there's an unknown planet that NASA knows about and astronomers know about, simply aren't telling us about this. Some people believe the Denver airport has places where the Illuminati meet and control the world. If you've ever been to the Denver airport, it is beautiful. It's an absolutely stunning piece of architecture. Some of these conspiracy theories are true. What we won't have time to discuss in today's talk is that one of the chapters in the book is when conspiracy theories turn out to be true. That's another aspect altogether that lends credence to conspiracists who believe that all the others were wrong, but no, I've got it right. And so when some turn out to be true, the Gulf of Tonkin incident that caused the US to escalate the war in Vietnam, and it was entirely prefabricated, sometimes it turns out to be true. I've written fairly extensively on MK Ultra. It's a program. We definitely don't have enough time right now to talk about it. Essentially, the CIA was using LSD on unsuspecting people in order to see if it would act as a truth serum. Quite bizarre. Of course, we have the COVID. The reason why we see such a spike in conspiracy theories is because we are locked down. We are at our computers so many hours of the day, and we're glued to our television, and we're constantly inundated with information. There are many different theories about this. Donald Trump, you might recall, was one of the main people believing that Barack Obama should not have been president because he wasn't born in America. QAnon, it's at number 10 now. It's with a bullet, as they say. It's heading up the list because it is unique in that it's usually a conspiracy theory has an element of truth or plausibility. This does not. It has no connection to reality whatsoever, and yet millions of people, including members of the Republican Congress, believe in this. And again, if we want to talk more at the break, we can. Flat earthers, Kyrie Irving, great basketball player, was a huge proponent that the earth is actually flat. Chemtrails, this is what airplanes leave behind them, the contrails of water vapor and whatnot. Some people believe it's actually chemicals that are changing our behavior. Watergate turned out to be true. Anti-vaxxers, much of it started with Jenny McCarthy not vaccinating, being anti-vax because she believed her child became autistic as the result of a mumps, measles, rubella vaccine. The Illuminati, there are wealthy people, even Jay-Z, you will see on stage, he will do this kind of triangular thing of the Illuminati. They are controlling the world. UFOs have always been with us. Area 51, Roswell. Lots of people believe 9/11 was an inside job. It was not the result of Islamo terrorists. The JFK assassination, it couldn't have just been Lee Harvey Oswald. In case you're wondering what number one is, it's got to be that people faked, NASA faked the moon landing. Now, why should we want, I'll finish up here by saying, why should we want to talk to conspiracy theorists, right, who believe in these bizarre and so-called nutty ideas, right? Well, it's because they might be our brother or sister or parent, child, friend, stranger, or lover. Or doesn't matter. These are people who are seeing the world differently, right? Yeah, this is a good question to ask. Have you had any friend, family, colleague, or clients who've expressed conspiratorial views? I'd be surprised if some of us had not. It just seems like such a common aspect of the human condition, right? So what I introduce in the book are two ways in which to have discussions with conspiracists by using the Socratic method and cognitive behavioral therapy. The Socratic method, it's a dialogue between people, two or more, where probing questions are asked in an effort to better clarify concepts and uncover, underlying assumptions and presuppositions to foster critical thinking about what people believe. And Socrates feigned ignorance. He would pretend he didn't know what the person was referring to, whether it was they were talking about justice or beauty or truth or love. He would say, "Really? You know what love is? Tell me, I have no idea." And as the person would talk, he would occasionally say, but there might be some contradictions there. So with CBT, we have essentially talk therapy. Many of you will already know what CBT is. Basically working through problems that helps with anxiety, people with anxiety and depression, and it helps people to use logic and reason to try to kind of turn the script, as it were, and allow the person to be more in control of their thoughts instead of allowing your thoughts to control you. Basically, I think it's a form of philosophical dialogue that's very helpful with psychotherapy. What I found is that the pattern of discussion with a conspiracist tends to follow this approach. You listen because they're going to want to talk. And you can't simply tell a conspiracist, "You're wrong because here are the facts." Otherwise, they would have figured it out themselves. They would have seen the facts and, okay. So don't think you can fix a conspiracist just simply by telling them, "Here's what the truth is, now move on with your lives." No, you have to hear them out, because the more you listen, and if you need to feign ignorance, then so be it. That's where the Socratic method comes in. You get them to talk, and you are interested in what they're saying, and the more you listen, the more they're going to trust you. The more you try to interject, the more they might dig in and again see you as being the problem. So you got to listen a lot, and it is a time-consuming endeavor. Unfortunately, the information can be spread online in matters of minutes or seconds, but yet getting over that takes time. So you have to get trust. You have to create a relationship of trust by listening. Then you gradually suggest. So it would be, okay, a few minutes ago you said A, now you're saying not A. Okay, I want to believe you, but you did say A, now you're saying not A. We know those two can't exist. Although it is the case that some conspiracists can maintain and violate logic. And so you have to be very careful in trying to make your suggestion to try to get them to walk them through their pattern of belief. So it's not going to be easy. And we've created an influences and profile checklist to help people categorize where their conspiracy theorist is at in terms of their particular state of mind. Some people might be really beyond the level of logic, but their likelihood to harm themselves or others is very, very low. Others might not be as far along on the spectrum of logic and irrationality, but are more highly, they'll go out and they'll demonstrate, they might even be moved to violence or acts of vandalism or whatnot. We have to gradually introduce to the conspiracists the idea that changing one's mind can be a good thing, is a healthy thing, and for sure that it's not a bad thing. So we're talking about a paradigm shift. We have to make it okay to change one's mind, as did Kyrie Irving, who was a flat earther who eventually was convinced by essentially elementary school teachers saying he was making their job much more difficult by having kids believe that the earth wasn't spherical, but that it was flat. He took it upon himself to pull himself out of the rabbit hole. So how are we going to dangle the carrot or be encouraging to get that person to come out of the rabbit hole by essentially finding an escape plan, developing an exit strategy, so that when they're ready, when they're more capable of realizing that they might not have everything correct, you've got to be there. You've got to be ready to say, this isn't a problem. You know, when you use the Socratic method and CBT to gradually gain their trust while introducing inconsistencies and contradictions to their story, what we're essentially doing is, and I know this is biased, we're introducing a level of critical thinking to them, so that essentially what we want to do is draw them out and then reward them like the phoenix from the flames, like rebuilding from the ashes. Reward them and say, you know what? Everybody has had false beliefs. Everybody in the world. I probably possess false beliefs right now about some aspects of the world. That's normal. That's what being human is all about. But what we do is we can learn and we can build. Don't forget, resistance to change is going to be, that's the norm. We have to make the conspiracists feel as that there's no shame in changing their mind, and that we have examples ready to go in which people have done this. Einstein changed his mind about certain things about the universe. We have to have, and I have a list in the book of what people can use, because the book is called How to Talk to a Conspiracy Theorist, a guidebook. So it literally will guide people through, so that when their conspiracist is at this point, you have these ready to go examples of famous people who have thought one way at one time and now think quite differently. And so we need to normalize that the changing of beliefs is something we all do, and that this is perfectly acceptable. And we continuously praise the conspiracists for their desire in and for what they believed they were doing all along, which many believed they were the ones that were more, skeptical. You sheeple, you'll just believe anything. So we can work on that, right? We can build on that. So we're trying to get them through what's known as the sunk cost fallacy, the idea that I've spent the last 10 years of my life believing in the flat earth, and now you want me to give that? No, I've invested too much of my time, and I'm going to feel foolish if I do. We have to get around that notion that all is not lost, that in fact there's more to be gained in understanding the world more differently in a much more enriched way. These are the qualities upon which we will build, the idea that they began as skeptics, that they believed to be good critical thinkers. Okay, let's build on that, right? And so when we develop this escape plan, one that is compassionate and non-judgmental and understanding and inviting, we must epistemically move them away from the conspiracy story and minimize their attachment to it, while at the same time praising them for taking this journey with you. And that is a delicate balance of diplomacy indeed, but it is one which I believe we must engage in if we truly want to help a conspiracy theorist. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. DiCarlo. That was phenomenal. And I was so interested to see that 100% of our participants polled that they had some sort of an experience with folks expressing conspiratorial views. So, and very helpful to think about, what is the response? And wonderful to see that you're going back to those tried and tested CBD and Socratic views. We have a couple of questions that have come in. If we can take a few more minutes.
Yes.
And just to pose a couple of them for you. We won't take too long, folks. If you're past your lunch hour just a little bit, this will only be another 5 or 10 minutes, but I do want to get some of these questions in. Probably the one that you can expect a lot about right now is, what could public health have done to lessen conspiracy theories about the vaccine? Is there something that they could still do or should have done to prevent those?
Yeah, we actually put in bids to the provincial government to try to make suggestions towards that end. They're doing public service announcements, which are good. It's the timeliness of them. They have to get them out much sooner, so that as soon as an episode comes up, for example, we're going very image heavy on this book, so that images are very important to people. So Johnson & Johnson's vaccine, what was it? 6 episodes of blood clotting and 7 million, right? So then what we need to do is we have to have that as an image, but then we have to show birth control, 1 in 1,500, smoking, 1 in 300, COVID, 1 in 5. We have to give people those numbers to then say, the likelihood, right, and analogies are good, the likelihood of you getting a blood clot from one of these vaccines is so remote, you would have to be, struck by lightning while wearing a clown suit, while driving in a car on, some isolated road somewhere. We have to show that, and that the overwhelming likelihood of the benefit of a vaccine so far outweighs the possible negative side effects that could result. It alleviates people's anxiety. But I also blame the media. You turn on CNN, Fox, right away, they go for these, another case of blood clotting. Well, as soon as people hear that, they commit the fallacy of large numbers. They assume that, oh, I'm going to be the one, right? Like I could win the lottery. Sure, you could. Right? And maybe we should use that analogy. The likelihood of you getting a blood clot is you winning $65 million in a Lotto Max lottery. How many times have you done that?
Maybe we should give out lottery tickets with the vaccine.
We should, right? And part of the problem is whenever we go through stage 3 of drug trials, and now we have it out into the public, people don't realize that there's a stage 4. And the stage 4 is the reporting of anomalies to efficacy of drug treatments. And this is known as the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or VAERS. And it was created as a useful online report for anybody, personally, you, me, anybody, who feels as though we've had some kind of adverse reaction to it. What's happening is the anti-vaxxers are hijacking it, and they're typing all kinds of things into it so that any person who goes to that site will see, this one guy went through a hospital and filmed and said, all of these dead people here, they all just got the vaccine.
Oh.
Right? So, I mean, how
the news sources come in. Yeah.
Right. So it's
one more question here, if you don't mind. Sharon asks, and this is a good question. In our family, I believe there may be a strong connection with alcohol, substance abuse, weed smoking, and the ease of which loved ones were pulled into conspiracy theory beliefs. Is this actually a link?
Yeah, well, substance abuse can certainly skew the way in which information is interpreted and acted upon. If there are other pre-existing biases, then those substances might exacerbate or make worse the way in which that information is interpreted. And then if there's any elements of family indoctrination that are involved as well, that goes a long way towards, entrenching those particular ideas. And it's so difficult to get people to see otherwise once you've become patterned, your behavior has been patterned after a certain set of information, and you see things, and then any further evidence just would confirm that already existing bias. So yeah, those elements can definitely make a current situation worse.
To hear your thoughts on this notion that of the endorphins and the drugs that it feels like we're the high that you get from being theories. So last question here, and I think it's somewhat tied to that. To what extent did Donald Trump contribute to making conspiracy theories seem legitimate?
Probably, one of the single greatest spreaders of misinformation in recent history, without question. I don't know what our viewers beliefs are about Donald Trump, but yeah, whether deliberately or unintentionally, he was a great contributor of the spread of misinformation, and still is, and will continue to be. We all predicted that if he were to lose this election, he would do exactly as he said, right? Will there be a peaceful transition of power? Well, that shouldn't be an issue because I should win. If I don't win, it's because the election was rigged. So he had everything in place prior to his loss. So he just continues to foster more and more disinformation. And, I find that type of behavior incredibly abhorrent. But when you do realize who he is and what his mental state of being is, it might not make it easier to accept, but it does give a context to why he does behave that particular way. He literally has great difficulty admitting he was ever wrong. Have you ever heard Donald Trump say in his career, yeah, my bad, that was on me? No, he always deflects, right? He can never be wrong.
I think it would be prudent of you when your book comes out on how to talk to folks with conspiracy theories to send a copy to Mr. Trump. So, because it sounds to me, or people around him anyway, that they may need it. So that's great. So we're just a little bit over time today, but I really do want to thank you, Dr. DiCarlo, for spending your time with us. These will be part of a monthly series about looking at some of the biggest ethical and most interesting ethical issues that are relevant to the pandemic and certainly relevant to our society today. So our next one will be on Wednesday, May 19th. Those of you that have joined us via Zoom, there'll be a registration link for that comes up in your email. And those of us that have joined us on Facebook, will put that registration link on the Facebook page for you to sign up for next month's webinar. So thank you again, Dr. DiCarlo, for your time. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Take care, everybody.